On this episode of Root Access, we're diving deep into missing melodies, AI music generation, and its nearly complete omission of the Global South, with authors Atharva Mehta and Shivam Chauhan. Hi, Atharva and Shivam. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about your work. We're excited to have you.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'd like to start by just asking you both a little bit about your journey to this space. Atharv, we could start with you. Share with us a little bit about your journey into machine learning in this area in particular.
Since childhood, I have been trained in Hindustani classical music, which is very native to India, and I have been a vocalist. So, music has been part of my life since my childhood, and I never really got the opportunity to apply something to it. I never really thought about applying something on it. And in college, in third year, I started with my machine learning journey. So, I shifted from development, software development, and shifted into machine learning. And I initially worked on the educational NLP space and more towards making it more accessible to students. But when I approached Professor Monajit and I wanted to work with him on culture, he asked me if I would be comfortable working on music since I had a musical background. And that's how I kind of dived into this space. And then as I explored further, I felt the need for this space to grow in different dimensions across cultures, and that's why I think I am currently working on this space.
Okay, Shivam.
Yeah, so essentially, I was introduced to machine learning during my master's. So essentially, at that time, primarily I was working on reinforcement learning. So essentially, what are the NLP applications of reinforcement learning? Then soon after that, actually, I joined Microsoft. So I was working in the Bing Ads team at Microsoft. There, I was working in ads recommendation system. So basically, if a user searches for a query on Bing search engine, what are the different ads you can show him or her on the Bing search engine? Then during this year, also starting of this year, I approached Professor Monojit, and actually he told me about the projects that he is working on currently. And these are actually very interesting projects. These are mostly related to the culture and the inclusivity of different cultures across the world, and how do people perceive from different cultures, means cultures they do not know about. So essentially, from that I started working on the music generation model. So essentially, how music is being perceived by different people across the world.
Okay, and that kind of leads us into the motivation of this work specifically. It's an analysis of, over 1 million hours of audio data sets. You personal or manually analyzed over 200 papers, but just give us a little bit of motivation for this paper in particular and kind of an overview of the problem space.
So basically, when we started off initially, we had to do a lot of literature survey just to get an idea of what is happening in this space and what has happened before. So while we were looking at different literature and different papers, we could not help but observe that many papers were very Western centric and had a lot of focus on Western music style. So when we had this realization, we tried to deep dive into this aspect. So we thought that we'll do a detailed analysis of the inclusivity of different cultures in the music generation space. So the motivation behind this work is that if you don't include all cultures, it would definitely lead to cultural homogenization. And the risk is that then the global north would be predominantly represented in the digital music space, and this would lead to cultural erosion for the global south genres. And our motivation is kind of embedded in that space.
And can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that process that I just described? You like 1 million hours, over 1 million hours of audio data set, 200 papers. Elaborate on that process of how you kind of narrowed down all of that data to conduct this analysis.
So essentially, what we did was, so there is a very widely used scholarly package which people use to actually retrieve a lot of papers and do a literature survey. So it's an automated approach. So essentially, what we did was we had this search query. So essentially, basic search queries, right? AI music or music generation or symbolic music, or means you can say that transformer-based music generation models. All these search queries, we had a pool of these things, and then we ran a scholarly package, and it will retrieve all the papers that are available on at least Google Scholar. So we did that, and that collection actually gave us around 5,000 papers actually. So there are a lot of people working on music generation. So we cannot analyze manually all these 5,000 papers. So essentially what we do is let's take the top conferences, means the top conferences what people are working on. So we narrowed down to our 11 conferences. So it includes AAAI or ACM, ICAPS, SMIR, NeurIPS, or uh, IPSCO, means there are or ACL, means different types of conferences we did, and these are the top conferences actually where you get state of the art work in any field, in NLP, in computer vision, in music generation. You can take anything. Now that actually helped us, and it brought down our pool to just 800 papers. So from 5,000, we moved down to an 800 papers. Now we reviewed these 800 papers. So essentially, some of these papers are only meant for generation models, or some of these papers are only based for your data sets papers. So Atharva find out there is around 1 million hours of music that is actually being used to train these models on. So essentially, you cannot review completely read 800 of these papers. We do it, so let's narrow down our approach to only title and abstract. So if we find some information in the title and abstract only, we will take that. That helps us to further narrow down our paper. So essentially, we found out that there are around 152 papers which actually talks about new data sets in music generation. Because people use these data sets. Essentially, if you combine all of these audios in each of these papers, you get around 1 million hours of music. And there was another thing. So essentially, this was the data sets part that we curated, means how data sets are formed. Now, how are these data sets being used in the current models? So what we did was, if there are specific terms in this title and abstract, like a transformer-based approach is being used or a diffusion model is being used, we picked only those papers which actually start with a new generation model for specifically for music. So that gave us a list of 244 papers. So essentially now you can only manually so Atharva reviewed 152 papers for datasets, and I reviewed 244 papers. And then we further did our study that means on the music generation models, that how are these models being trained, or what is the geographical region, or what type of music they are being focused on. And essentially this is the whole process that further led down to our study.
Right. So you open up the paper with three questions that you state that you're going to attempt to address in the paper. Can you share what those three questions are, and why are those, how did you end up with those being the focal points or the main points that you wanted to address throughout your work?
We wanted to just answer simple three questions. What is the extent of representation? The first question answers that currently, if there is a particular genre that is being used in a particular place in the world, what representation that genre has in current AI music generation models or not. Then there is a regional representations of all the regions that are being present in the world. So there is a global north, and there is a global south. How well they are represented in these music generation models. Then there is an instrument representation. So basically, there are many instruments that people use to generate their ethnic musics, and then what is this instrument representation? So we focused on of these representations: genre, region representation, and then there is instrument representation. So this was the first question that we answered. The second question was is basically on. Uh, so there are many researchers across the world that are working on music generation field, but what where are these researchers located? So maybe a researcher is from a
Right.
different region from the world, but he or she is only working on this particular type of music. And now, even if you are focusing on that, what is the reliability of your evaluation system? So there are different evaluation metrics like FAD, means people are using FAD, people are using KR divergence. They are using all these evaluation metrics, but how well these metrics actually captures this Western music? I would say not Western, you can say global North music or global South music. So how well they are capturing or not? And the third question actually, what is the correlation with the popularity? So if you look at India actually it's more than 1 billion people that are living in India. It's a huge set of population. You get many diverse cultures. Means if you go to Middle East, then also there is a very big population that has different kinds of music. They have maqam in Middle East. Then you have ragas in India. Even though they are very popular in the local areas, or means locally, but they are not actually very prevalent in this music generation models or not. So there is a big disparity between what is popular music in different types of world, and what these AI music generation models can actually generate right now. So these were the three different questions actually that we focused on.
Tell me a little bit about the backbone models that you selected for evaluation.
So there are different kinds of evaluation metrics. At the beginning of it is a backbone model that converts the raw audio into a representation or a vector. And then after that, we calculate certain distances between the vector, that is the generated audio, and the vector of the reference audio, that is basically a reference corpus. So we want the generated vector to be
Mhm.
as close as possible to the reference vector. But the problem here is that if the backbone model does not understand certain kinds of genres, it might not be that efficient or that effective in representing those genres, in representing those kind of audios in that vector space. We chose two
Right.
backbone models here. One is PAN-CNN14 and one is VGGH model. So both are trained on a large audio corpus, and one is YouTube 8 million and one is audio set. So these are both, they are 100,000 hours data set, and they have been trained on 10-second or 30-second clips mostly. And what our aim was to basically analyze the data set on which they were trained and then see the distribution of instruments in that particular data set to see how well is the global north represented in that data set and the global south in that data set. So basically, if the models have a less rich data used to train the backbone models, then those models might not be as effective as we think in representing different cultures. So even if we can say that, okay, this generated audio is very close to the reference corpus, we might not be able to do the same for different underrepresented cultures. Basically, the logic of selecting these backbone models was that these are quite popular and most of the music generation papers use these as their backbone models to analyze these metrics.
Let me test my understanding. So, one of the problems here is that as AI music generation becomes more prevalent and potentially music will start to be created in this way. If these models that we're using cannot accurately replicate, I don't know if that's the right word, but replicate these global South genres or the regional instruments, then we're essentially going to lose those in this new era of AI generated music. We're not going to be, those are just not going to be accessible. Is that kind of the very big problem?
So essentially, what is happening is that if the model is not representing it well, then even if the reference corpus is, let's say, of Hindustani classical and the generated sample is Hindustani classical, and it cannot represent either, then it would give us the false notion that okay, these are quite close, even if it is not representing it properly. So let's say I have a faulty model that is
Mm.
not representing it well in the vector space. And I have taken one generated corpus and one reference corpus. And then I boil them down to two vector representations. Now the vector representations are not accurate or are not true to the raw audio that they have used. But still, if they are close enough, I would get the false notion that okay, my model is generating good raw audio. So that is where the problem lies.
All right. So share with us your findings related then to genre and regional distribution of AI music research across the major conferences that you said you looked at 11 across 11 conferences. In your opinion, why is that an important data point to look at?
Basically, see, data sets is what the model is going to learn in the end. And if the data set does not have appropriate distribution of different cultures, different genres, then it would eventually lose out on those cultures and genres. So what our finding was that there are about 6,000 hours of European music in the data sets in all the conferences that we analyzed. And then genres like pop and rock are very well represented. But on the other hand, African music would have just 28 hours, 30 hours of data set. And the representation of folk and experimental music is even lesser than 2% in the whole data set across all conferences. So that is something that is pretty alarming. And if we look at the bigger picture, the models, if they are not trained on these kinds of data sets, it would eventually lose out on all the information and might end up presenting a skewed picture of the music. In terms of the papers also, so 88% of the papers are authored by people in Global North, and the researchers from Global South are close to
Right.
2.5 to 3%. And even the instrument disparity that we're talking about, these backbone models are trained on 70-80% of data that is from Global North, whereas the representation of local, regional, cultural specific instruments is close to 2%. So these are kind of our findings, or these are important factors that would eventually lead to the model's response, or might lead to a skewed response from the model. And that's what we are trying to look at.
Now, in terms of the paper representation, is that like you mentioned, I think 2.4% from Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East,
Yeah.
majority from the global north. You mentioned in the paper that this could be because of the strong music industry of the global north. I guess what I'm wondering is how different is the distribution when compared to other fields of AI/ML research? In other words, is this underrepresentation something that you could find across different fields, or is it more isolated to this particular area of AI music generation research?
So this kind of disparity has always been there. Like before in NLP also, there was a huge disparity in the language that was generated earlier on. But then Emily Bender, Professor Emily Bender, pointed out that such kind of things would lead to digital skewness and underrepresentation. So after that, I think there has been a lot of work in NLP in language to mitigate this kind of bias. But since music generation is a very upcoming niche field, not many researchers are particularly working on it, and that is why I think this is a problem that got overlooked and that we are trying to solve here.
You can see the basic similarity between both of these problems is right. In both of these fields, there is data skewness. So essentially, if you go to the NLP field only, you will find English is the predominant language which is actually being used in pre-training of large language models essentially. And if even if you go to, since this is the language being used, so essentially the type of music which is actually predominated to English, like pop music, hip hop music actually, or which is or the countries which actually where the native language is English, so essentially their music culture is predominantly being represented in AI music generation also. This kind of data skewness similarities in you can find in NLP also, and you can find in music generation also. Then there is so global South has actually been underrepresented not just in music, but actually it's we have actually mentioned this in paper also. Global South is actually being underrepresented in large language also, in pre-training of these languages also. Like are native languages spoken in Africa or or you can say India or Southeast Asia. Means these have many few speakers of this language. Means or there is a language where there are many speakers, but still they are not being represented in this models. Essentially, same goes with music. You do not find this music.
And I want to go into the instruments for a minute. So, can you explain and give us some examples of the differences between what you describe as regional instruments versus global instruments?
I think a good example for a global instrument would be guitar. So I don't want to present it very Western centric because guitar is something that we also use in Indian music. It's been used across various genres. Whereas there are certain specific there are
Mhm.
instruments that are specific to several cultures and that have been adapted from those cultures. So which include sitar, or in there is oud, or these kind of instruments that are specific to certain cultures and that are not there in the global space yet. So these are the instruments that we need to adapt to the global space, and I think maybe adapt to different genres. So I have seen many examples in Bollywood music, in Hindustani classical as well. People can use guitar or other instruments similar, like piano, for playing Hindustani classical
Mm.
Turkish Maqam music. But uh, the other way around is very rare, and that's what we don't see usually. That's why we have termed it as more of a regional instrument than a global instrument.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at too is where's the interplay between these big Western genres, and then are those genres also not represented when they come out of the global South, for example?
So I think one of the pitfalls of our study would be that we did not really deep dive into these intersections of different genres. So let's say Indian hip hop, we did not analyze the total number of hours that are represented in Indian hip hop. But just to give a rough idea of it, all these initially have been started off in some part of the world. But since we live in an inclusive multicultural world, they have been adapted in different cultures, different music styles. And that is why what you can see is that, okay, Indian pop has become a big thing now. Indian hip hop is also becoming a big thing now. And that's why the term of regional genres is, I think, that should not be the term that we should use anymore, because regional genres are slowly becoming more
Okay.
global as we go towards fusion music and as we try to incorporate them more in the global scenario. And particularly in the digital space in the market, at this point, a lot of people, a lot of companies are focusing on creating intermixed or intergenre music, creative fusion music. That's why I think, yeah, I think initially we did not study these intersections of global and regional genres, but uh, moving forward, I think this distinction won't stay the way it is right
All right. We already kind of mentioned it a little bit, but you do pull it out in the paper. The risks to genres like Hindustani folk and traditional Arabic maqam, those are two of the ones that you mentioned in the paper. If they're not represented in these data sets, tell us about the risk to genres like those.
Yeah, essentially, if you look at these, right, if you, for the previous question also, if you look at this means, so if a person is located in your Southeast region, suppose he or she is located in a Middle East region or an Indian region, he is not learning what is the ethnic music that has been being produced by his previous generations. There are hip hop versions or pop versions of means their music. So essentially, you are forgetting, you are bringing all those fusions, but you are essentially you are essentially forgetting about the basic elements of your music that are currently present in your ethnic culture, right? So there is kind of a cultural erosion, right? We
Right.
slowly and slowly, what will happen is all these Western music may take over, means all these genres, and we see that, right, there is an Indian hip hop, and that is very same as your Western hip hop. There is no difference in, you cannot actually create a difference also, and you lose very this Hindustani folk music or maqam, which is Middle Eastern music and all. There is a very slowly it will happen, because I think people are using AI almost for everything of means in generation field. I think if you, even if you look at ChatGPT, right, it means people are very nicely using it for their everyday work. And if there is a big ChatGPT kind of a model for music generation also, we will it will start to generate only musics which are very much focused on global now. So there is a slowly, it will happen slowly, but there will be a very big risk of cultural erosion. Then there is a economic marginalization also. So global north countries are basically, they are developed countries, means there is a very high per capita income in global north countries, and global south countries do not have that. So even if we have good musicians, we have good singers in these global south countries, their music actually means they won't find that economic backing from all these big industries and all of these, and slowly this economic marginalization, and they also then have to genres from Western music also. So slowly there will be an economic marginalization also of these music. Then there is this reinforcement also, right? Essentially, if you look at English also, people have created data sets for languages. Very simple way to generate data set, right? You do a Google Translate, or you do something basically, or ChatGPT Translate, and you translate that English data sets to these languages. But essentially, you are bringing all those biases that are being present in English languages to this currently translated languages also. And same goes in music. So essentially, if you
Mm.
have this big model like a ChatGPT model for music generation, you are training that model on this very predominantly Western music, and now you are asking that model to generate genres like this. What it will do is, whatever biases that are present there in all these previous models, you are bringing those biases in these cultures also. So essentially, you are
Right.
it's a fusion, but it's not a very good fusion. It's like a fusion where 90% part is being played by this global north music, and that, and the global south actually only contributes to 10% of that music, and you cannot recognize that 10% also. Means if you're because if you
Right.
listen to that music, you will see that, okay, you do not find those elements very clearly in this music. So basically, this reinforcement will also propagate.
Yeah, because music is so, at times, at least even more than language, it can be representative of your culture. You know, if you just think of so many countries that speak the same
Yeah,
language, but have these musical genres that are unique to their
yeah.
culture and representative of them, and their history. So I think it's a really important area to explore. And you bring up sort of a point that I wanted to ask in my next question. Music is an industry. So, how can we incentivize, or what are your thoughts on incentivizing research that doesn't have a commercial interest or a tie to the music industry?
AI model learns whatever is being presented to it in the form of a data set. So essentially, you have to have these data sets somehow.
Right.
Now, to get these data sets, there should be some economic backing to that. So there can be grants or some kind of a funding programs from government or actually or universities or the researchers also means which are actually working on that, and there should be a nice collaboration between this. Then there can be a collaboration between these cultural organizations also, right? There are different localized communities actually which still so as I said, right, there is a very good popularity of many kind of genres in the world, but they do not have their presence in the digital world. So essentially what you can do is you can do a
Right.
cultural collaboration with them. Actually, you can go to these communities, you can say that okay, what kind of a music they are being played on, and essentially if, I don't think even if they are currently they are singing their ethnic music, they are still not, they do not get any funding, but you can actually record these music, you can actually reach out to them. So there are, you can collaborate with this cultural
Hmm.
organization across the world. Then there is big organizations like Google or Microsoft. They have this big GPU clusters, or they have this big infrastructure to train this very big large language models, right? So essentially, they have to play some part of it. Means to actually capture these kind of not just music, actually in languages also. You have to capture these ethnic music across the world. Means they also have to play out, because if you look at any kind of a big corporation, right, Google, Microsoft, they have their music generation models actually present, and they are very good music generation models in respect of global north music. Means they are generating a very nice global north music there. So they are already
Hmm.
investing a lot in these music generation models, right? What they can simply do is they can actually start capturing these local music cultures also across the world, right? In Middle East or Southeast Asia.
In the paper, you make a couple of comparisons to initiatives in other fields. Two that you mentioned, Google's Inclusive Images competition and transfer learning. Can you elaborate a little bit on those and how you'd like to see them applied in this
Yeah.
field?
So essentially, we had a paper accepted in NACL. We got a confirmation actually on 22nd only, and actually there what we did was this was an actually next step to our this paper that right now we are discussing. So we took actually two models. So one was a Mustango model, one was a Music Gen model, and we found out that these two models, they are very state of the art, but they were actually only focusing on global north music. So we did a simple adaptation techniques. So what we did was we very lightweight neural networks we attached to both of these models, and we adapted them to an Hindustani classical music and Maqam music, and we get very good results. And we got that paper accepted in NACL. We got a confirmation just 2 days before this podcast only. We showed that these kind of techniques actually can capture in current models only these underrepresented music. As you mentioned that there's a Google Inclusive Images competition. We can have this kind of competitions means in regions which are actually underrepresented to get musical styles. In that competition, what they do is, right, they for images across the world, means you get these images, means they get these cultures, and you train these big models actually on these. So you can do the same for music also. You can arrange some small type of competitions, and you can get this musical styles for across the world. And then there is a Masakane project, which is actually done for NLP for African languages or not. So you can do a similar initiative in music also, right? There are already paradigms which are actually being explored in languages field. You just need to replicate those in music also.
You end the paper with recommendations for researchers in this space. What are some of those recommendations that you haven't touched on yet, and why do you think they're important?
So I think what we haven't yet addressed is the dataset creation part. So since it requires a lot of resources, a lot of collaboration, we are still in talks for it. But the resource intensive part is the dataset collection. Apart from that, as Shivam mentioned, we have tried transfer learning with smaller parameters on low resource culture music styles, and that has worked pretty well. But a pre-trained model is a different element. So basically, a pre-trained model would have all the understanding of those particular genres in depth, as compared to a smaller size model that we're attaching to the pre-trained model. So I think these initiatives are what we're looking forward to right now, and what we haven't yet addressed as of now. Shivam, if you want to add anything to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So essentially, there is a very nice recommendation also. Actually, we said in the paper that is some kind of a cautious AI generation. So a model should mention actually this thing.
Hmm.
If it is able to generate this genre, then actually it should say that clearly. Means what kind of genres that model can generate. Means you can say that, okay, in the papers people are mentioning that, okay, it's a global music model. It's not a global music model. It cannot generate many genres. You cannot say that. So you can say that, okay, these kind of genres that the
Mhm.
model can generate, then you can actually see that, okay, what are the discrepancies that were left out, or what are the genres that were left out from these models. So you can do that cautious AI generation. If you are not able to generate a genre, mention it. Means we did not include this genre. We did not include. Then there should be a transparency also across researchers, right?
Right.
People don't mention the details of the data sets many times. So people say that, okay, we collected data from YouTube, or we collected data from this Spotify. They say that, but essentially what kind of a data they collected, means even if they are not mentioning that, okay, we collected songs from this region, or we are collected instruments from this region, they should at least say that, okay, this was the playlist, or this was the kind of music that we actually took up. Means they do not need to mention every song or every type of musical style, but they need to mention, okay, this was the musical piece that we actually take. Means they, just broader way, so there's a clear picture among researchers also. They write what kind of a music is being trained on, or what kind of music this model can generate or not. But I think the most important recommendation would be a dataset creation also, because there is a very big lack in that part for musical styles. Means
Basically, when you're talking about the intersection of different genres across regions, so one major problem, so we thought of addressing that as well, but one major problem is that most of the music generation papers don't deep dive into these intersectional music styles. So let's say Indian pop or Indian classical, they have mentioned, but uh, is the rock music Indian rock, or is it Turkish rock, or is it different kind of? So these styles are not very clearly defined. That's why we cannot really analyze them in depth. So I think that's where the
Right.
problem lies in general.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think so. I'm curious now after hearing about this, is this a time sensitive problem?
So I think the digital space in general has a snowball effect. So more or less, these biases would be represented in the future models as well. In NLP, there is this concept of synthetic data generation. So if a model is generating data for another model to be tuned upon, so in that case, the model's existing biases would also be reflected in the model that is there, that is being trained on that particular data. And this snowballing effect is what leads to the bigger problem. So in NLP, this problem has been nipped in the bud, but yet there are cases where languages are eroding and people are not using them much. So in case of music as well, I think it is a time-sensitive problem which needs to be addressed.
maybe sometimes in future, I mean, I would say some means people are using, as I mentioned before also, right? People use ChatGPT for their day-to-day work right now. Means many people use it actually to generate their content. Means their people are doing their office work using ChatGPT. Means they are writing mails using ChatGPT. They have this so right now in music, you do not have that much popularity of AI generation music models. Means people are not using right now. They still are
Right.
generating these music from their means by themselves only. But it's, I think it is a time sensitive issue. Not that it is a time sensitive issue, but it will actually become, if we don't start addressing it right now, it will become bigger problem, and you will only have a very, I would say, very minimal set of genres
Yeah.
that are actually being generated, or people are enjoying only those. People will actually forget. Maybe all these things will get eroded. Like, right, English is that language which is being spoken everywhere. Means people, that is like a global language. People communicate with that. I'm not against English, but actually, but the thing is, for music, it should not happen that only particular genres are being only sung across the world, or means they are only being like these are the only musical styles that actually our previous
Hmm.
generations used to sung, or they do not know about music. But there are very nice
Right.
musical cultures across different regions, so they have to be incorporated. Otherwise, they will be eroded across means in coming years. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about the future work of like the next steps of this particular paper. Would you like to share any more about that and also any other future work coming up for either of you that may not be related to this specific paper?
So I think the recent work that we did on this was submitted to NACL, and that is basically focused on transfer learning for low resource genres. So basically, we took two genres and we tried to adapt these models to these cultural styles. And what we found out was that these models are pretty good at adapting to these genres. They can get the right timbre, the right
Right.
melody, the right rhythm. And we analyzed and evaluated all but I mean both the models on different criteria. Like that was a comprehensive evaluation, and the recent work kind of gave us a segue to approach this problem on a broader spectrum. So maybe we can include more and more cultures here, and try to work on culturally inclusive music. Maybe try fusing different genres using AI, and also we are trying to work on evaluating these models in a better way, because we don't want to have a bubble
Right.
around the AI generated space, that okay, these models are generating really well, and all the generated samples can't go through human evaluation because it's just too costly and resource intensive.
Actually, I'm pretty much excited. There will be sometime in future, I would say, ChatGPT kind of a model for music also. I would say there would be that, and that model should not have problems which current ChatGPT has. Means I'm not aware of every problem that ChatGPT has, but it should not have that bias or that erosion of many small languages. Even if we get this model, it won't cover every genre across the world, right? That is practically impossible. But essentially, even if we can bring some kind of a balance
Hmm.
between what is the popular genres across this world, means even if a huge set of population is singing it, let's capture that. We can actually store data set for that. So when we reach that part, means when we have this big model,
Hmm.
at least it should have as many genres as possible, and that will be, I think, a very nice work actually. Yeah, yeah. So let's see. I do not know. We do not have that resources for training
Yeah.
that kind of a model, but if somebody does it, let's do it properly.
Thank you both again for joining us. I look forward to reading the next papers that come out and continuing to follow your work in this space.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.